Okay guys, today I'm intending on making Frostmourne. With this video, I lost all the audio off of the video for reasons that I'm not entirely sure. I got new video equipment and it didn't turn out very well, so I'm sorry about having to have it all recorded as voiceover. Yeah, probably better quality than the microphone on the probably better quality than the microphone on the webcam anyway. And apologies for the amount of autofocusing. I didn't realise it was happening because the camera with the screen was so far away. Now, what you missed before I start this video is I've scaled Frostmourne in a drawing form, which I'm in the middle of showing you, and then I made, well, what I was holding at that point, which is transfer it onto greaseproof paper so I can trace it off onto the cardboard sheet. First thing you do is pick up your material. In this case I'm going to be using cardboard. This was a cheap, readily available material, so I decided to have an experiment with it and see what I can make. Now first off, you have to cut this, or the biggest part of the cardboard. In this case it came as boxes, so there was very little choice in it. I just cut out the big squares. Okay, once you've got your cardboard shapes, take the tracing paper version, which was done off the large paper one, and then transfer it on. If you don't know how to transfer off of greaseproof paper or tracing paper, you draw along with a HB pencil or something that's relatively soft, and then transfer the line just by scribbling on the other side of it, and the pencil will transfer off onto the card. In this case, I've already drawn it on a pen on one side, so it doesn't matter that I'm drawing over it, because it's just going to transfer. Well, it's not going to transfer until I decide to draw on the pen side. But this means you have lines to be able to cut it out, and for this design it ends up about 7 or 8 layers thick, and having to reproduce that 7 or 8 times with hand cuts is very difficult. It is also advised when making the tracing paper sides or the tracing paper templates that you alternate the position of the seams. So if you can't fit your entire sword on one material, if you're doing different layers, you don't have all your seams lining up, because then your sword will have a very weak spot in it where it's likely to break. I also put spines up them, but it's much better to have the material around the spine being able to hold up its weight. It just makes it a more useful prop overall, and it breaks less when you hit walls. once you've transferred all of your lines onto the card, it is then time to cut out. At this point in the video, you can see how bad the footage is there. This is what I managed to salvage. Yeah, it didn't go well. So at this point I have one of the sword pieces already cut out, at least 2 layers worth. So I'm going to stick the 2 together and hopefully make one of the layers to make the sandwich. Now unfortunately I apparently didn't get any footage there good enough of me actually cutting it, but once you've transferred the lines you cut it out. That's pretty much common sense. Now at this point use wood glue. Wood glue works quite well on cardboard because it was wood once. Then you put a certain amount of the glue on, as you can see, then stick it all together and hold together with cloves pegs. Just the point, this is the first sword I've had to go out and buy new pegs for because I ran out. But you can see here why the layering works to deal with the lack of support, and actually the differences in gap or the differences in templates that I drew to stick them together. Okay, by this point you can see it now looks somewhat like Frostmourne but covered in cloves pegs. Now the centerpiece that is going across the sword here is the spine that I refer to most of the time when I'm talking about my sword builds. Now you measure it by holding it up against the length of the sword, see where the ends are, and then mark it and cut. Now basically I'm just putting wood glue down the length of where the spine's going to be, and that spine is just a bit of beading. It's designed to go along walls and desks to make them look pretty, but in this case it's good for a bit of strength on a sword. Now take one of the layers that you had ready and put the offcut from the spine down the center of it. This offcut will be the same thickness as the actual spine. Now you mark around it to either side and then cut those sections out of the blade. These will layer up around the spine and hide it inside the sword. Okay, the wood glue that I've been using takes 24 hours to dry, so each one of these is on the next day. In this case, I am now placing the 2 layers together, sandwiching in the core. This, again, just finishes off the center. Also, at this point, it will look a lot thicker than you finally want, but that's alright because you're going to be filing away the edges later on to make the actual contours of the blade. You need a lot of material to file into. If you want, and you have the patience to redraw it 50 odd times, you can graduate the blade down, and then that involves a lot less filing later. But for now, just lots and lots of glue and lots of waiting and more pegs than I would like to count. Unfortunately, in this case, I hate to mock my own videos, but next time around, the next few are going to end up like this, because I recorded 3 of them, which is, the next up is my Fat Man build, which I did in one morning. I did it quite quick, just for a laugh before a convention, and I recorded it, but then the next one up is my Masamune for my Sephiroth, and I messed that up as well, down for exactly the same reason, to be fair. I'm still quite annoyed at the fact that it happened and I didn't notice, but that's what happens when you try to rush things and film them all together. Hopefully by this point I've worked out how to solve it, and I have dealt with the autofocus doing this, because autofocus, it just happens, there is an off for it. I did neglect to mention this when I started, but you need the extra layering out for around the handle and the handguard. Again, this is only 2 layers per side, but the skull fits on top of these sections, and you just need them for layering out. Again, it's just trace out the section that you want for the handguard. As we know, there's a triangular section in the center that still goes down from the handguard, and generally it takes a few seconds. I did forget about mentioning it earlier, so my apologies. Right, unfortunately I seem to have lost my footage of me making these skulls to go on. Now in this case there are only 2 skulls and I've got 4 out on the desk. That's because I've layered them up so high. I believe they're about 6 layers thick in the end, but my pegs will only hold on to 3. So I just do I just do the 2 sets of 3 like that, then glue them together at the end. Now the way I made them was to make one outline of the skull for the base layer, then go up, have the teeth on the 2nd and 3rd layer, then have them wipe out, but make sure to have the nose slits and the eye sockets going all the way up. You don't have to have the eye sockets going to the bottom if you want to add a few layers extra where they're not, to add some different layers inside, but you can't really see it on the finished sword, so I didn't really bother. Now you have that going up, and at the end, as the next section we'll see, there is a lot of filing. As you can see here, my skulls have now finished in all their layers, and my little completely unmenacing template is on the table. I just put the sword away after it's currently dried to all the layers thick, and now I'm using a file. Now you can't see it here, but this one is a rasp. It's an extremely rough file which will take off a lot of material very fast. Now the upside of this over a traditional file is getting material off fast, and the amount that I've left on, it'll take some time. As you can see by this point, I've made quite a lot of progress into curving off one side, and I'm about to start the other. Unfortunately there's no point showing it all, so onto the main blade. Now, the main blade itself, you mark off first how deep you want your blade, how far you want your edge to go in, and then you file back to that, and then try to get the exact contour that you wanted. Now I very much sped this up, so it should be able to show the whole process without it being too tedious, but if you're going to be starting this project, just remember... I can't believe I left that in. Okay guys, what happened there? I was twisting the sword around on the table, and I just knocked the tripod over and just smashed it to the floor. Yeah, you know, I had this camera a week and I was already hitting it into the floor. And for the point, this isn't the being knocked over is not the reason for the recording failing. But, you know, it happens. You can see also when I'm swinging the sword around, I am coming so close to hitting it. But yes, you draw the line around the edges, and then you generally file back to that line, and then try to get it so the two bits of blade meet in the centre. Now in this case, you don't have to worry half as much as with the more solid materials over whether security in a convention will believe it's a real sword and sharp because it's made of cardboard. Whereas I've seen them have issues with anything that looks remotely sharp in the past, so I try to err on the side of caution. But yes, as you can see at the end, it's becoming quite thin. Now, since I've had, this sword has been out to a few shows and photo shoots, and the end has started to dent a little, but it's made of cardboard, is what you can expect. Unfortunately, these fiddly little sections here were a real nightmare, and it took me ages to do. I mean, this is actually sped up to 1000%, so 10 times normal speed. This honestly took me a good hour just to do the main blade, and the skulls took almost as long. Right, now I've got all the filing done. I've done both skulls and everything else. At this point I was really glad, because this is a lot of filing. I believe originally I was planning to put little skulls on the end, but cardboard is too much of a soft material, and it's a bit of downside to have to do that, so I ended up giving up. Now, this was my first experiment with this finishing technique. It actually doesn't end up that bad if you're willing to put in the time and stop it from sticking onto things. But I got silicone sealant, it's generally made for bathrooms and just stuff like that. That's what's in the gun. I put that onto a tile grout, well, touchy wallpaper pasting thing actually, and then rub it along the edges. This means that you can get one solid line for the edge instead of having all the broken cardboard layers from where you had to file it and make it into shape. You can either file or sand it, but it would have ended up that way anyway. Now you can go around, go over all the edges that you've filed like this, and it marks it, and it makes it all one smooth layer and has much better finish to it. Now unfortunately, with the cheapness of cardboard, it doesn't really matter how much you do, because you'll always see that it's cheap cardboard at the end. Now this section is after painting. Now again, what I've done here is just one layer of undercoat and then a layer of silver across the whole thing, and then the layer of, and then put some gold on top of the horns. Now you may be asking, what is this absolute madman doing with hairspray? Now unfortunately, the silver paint that I got was bought a long time ago for a project, but this paint transfers onto everything like mad, so I figured I'd give it a shot with spraying hairspray on it, just to see if it would keep all of the metallic silver sticking to it. The end of this experiment is, no, it doesn't work, but that metallic paint looks absolutely amazing. It's come out brilliantly in photos as well. It just, just be prepared to look silver at the end of the day, because the amount the metal's transferred onto you. So yeah, it's ill-advised to try this. I am just leaving it here to show I made this mistake, and if anyone else wants to try it and get better results, good on you, but mine was terrible. Okay, at this point I'm going to wrap the handle. Now I'm using a long sheet of or a long strip of leather. You don't have to use leather, you can use cloth or anything you want. Now in this case I'm adhering it with hot glue. I am a fan of hot glue much more than I am of wood glue, because wood glue takes 24 hours and hot glue takes about 15 seconds. It's far nicer of a material to work with. Now you use part of the strip down the length of the handle. It doesn't have to go that far, just enough so when it wraps over it'll be adding extra friction to stop it undoing from that end. Now once you're down to the bottom of the handle, turn it 90 degrees so it can wind up the shaft, and then glue it onto the first bit going down. This is just to stop it from sliding, and this glue isn't really that useful in the long term. But when you go up the handle, make sure that you have 50% or half of the next layer on top of the previous layer. Again, this is if in the event it does slip, it won't show all of the metal work underneath and still look like it's properly wrapped. Now you go up every now and again, put in a little bead of hot glue. This again just stops it from unraveling. Now at the end of here I wasn't entirely sure whether it was going to make it down all the way or not, so I do a quick test just to check if it makes it all the way down to the bottom, which, to be fair, I'm not going to spoil it. Do I have enough? Do I? Yes, of course I do. See, yeah, first time I watched that back I was just like, I really want to know. Okay, again, follow exactly the same method, but go down in the reverse direction. This just thickens up the handle, it makes it nicer to hold for the day, and the fact that with that paint you're going to have grey hands all day anyway. Once you get to the end, undo the last two of the wraps around, and then run the end up through them and pull it up tight. Now this knot is used, well, this knot I learnt doing archery to stop the knocking points coming loose, but it also works quite well, especially if you shove it full of hot glue with sword handles. Now of course I go around, tack up sections with hot glue just to make sure I got it all. Okay, and these are the pictures of my final sword. As you can see, most of the little errors don't show up half as bad. So, okay, to anyone who's actually made it this far, thank you for watching the video. Honestly, I intend to be doing much better in future, but it was too much to lose 3 videos worth of footage at this point, so I had to just make up do with what I could, and unfortunately it ended up not being the best. So hopefully something in this video will have been useful to somebody, and I'll see you next time.